Yeah,
you
that was
know?
very much my first film, was the questions I kept asking that I couldn't answer myself. And I didn't have the moral crisis. I didn't have that. I just had a gnawing question that I couldn't answer myself. And so I explored that through every single character. Is that what is that? And so what's it about? That question became, the most important thing. I had no answers. I didn't know how to answer these questions, any of these questions, because they were things that haunted me. I didn't know about myself and therefore others. Can we get back to the Ides of March for a second? Because when you were talking about, you have your play, and which I had seen, and I just when you then, but after seeing your film, which is, I guess, I don't know if this is going to be a compliment or not. After seeing it, I can't remember the play because it created entirely, the world was one which seems so specifically a film, even though, and which is a very rare thing in coming from a play. How did you do that? How did you
Well,
completely think it?
I mean, first of all, most of the credit goes to George Clooney for that, for everything having to do with that film.
Mhm.
And that goes from the script to casting it, to financing it, to directing it, to producing it. That film would not have been made if it wasn't for
Great
him.
man. Yeah.
Uh, and, uh, and, and there are three names for the script. It's written not just by me, but also by George and his producing partner, Grant Heslov.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work you're seeing, I would say the lion's share of the work you're seeing on the screen in terms of new material is theirs.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I, the way that process worked is I worked on a couple of drafts adapting the play, and they were kind of exploratory and trying different things, and then arrived at, okay, here's a version of it, and then they took that draft and they went to work
Mm-hmm.
and made a ton of changes and some stuff throughout wholesale, and then other aspects of the play that I myself had gotten rid of, they brought back in word for word from the play
Interesting.
itself.
Interesting.
So it wasn't like a process where the three of us were sitting in a room breaking story and then divvying up who's writing that scene or taking
Yeah.
passes. It was in stages,
Uh-huh.
and George knew he was going to direct the film. So he was crafting the screenplay towards what he intended to direct.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, I mean, one of the things about the play is that, the story, which always focused on Stephen Morris. In New York, that was John Gallagher Jr. on the stage at the Atlantic Theater Company, and in LA at the Geffen, it was Chris Pine, who just before he, or as he was getting super famous from Star Trek.
Yeah.
Um, in the movie, it's Ryan Gosling. That is was the protagonist always. And the
Yeah.
one thing that I always knew that George and Grant were going to do, and we talked about this beforehand, and why I felt comfortable completely like placing this in their hands, is that this was a story about the moment someone turns into a monster, which doesn't happen overnight, but
Yeah.
happens in gradations. And so you have this young man who has more power at his fingertips than he probably is prepared for emotionally or in
Mm-hmm.
terms of maturity, who's super smart and capable, who is no saint, you know, is not an innocent person coming into the movie, but it's still probably a little bit more on the idealistic side of the
Yes.
spectrum than on the completely self-serving side. And what is that moment in which he crosses over? And so the whole story
Yeah.
is, how does Jared Kushner become Jared Kushner,
Yeah.
right? Like in a way, or there's countless examples of someone that started off one way and became another way.
It's an
The
incredible question.
moment, the moment that this protagonist goes over to the dark side, the movie's over or the play's over, right?
Yeah.
So the whole play is the justification of, or the mapping of what leads up to that moment,
Often
right?
happens. I often find those things, if I give myself the ability to just explore it more, I will come to that rather than being so rigid in my belief that I should find that before I start typing.
I don't know. I mean, there's no one formula, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I don't. It's interesting. I don't think I'm searching for that thing the same way you are of like what is
yeah.
the
No, it
moral
seems much more organic the way you do it.
we have to arrive at. for me, not every story propels itself towards a moment of like moral crisis per se.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I think every story, if it's has any value, whether it's a comedy, a drama, a TV show, a film, a play, what have you, has to be about something, and you need to know
Yeah.
what it's about. You
Yeah.
might not know how you fully feel about that or what you'll discover about it, but you do need to know, have some sense of what you're trying to say,
Mm-hmm.
or what you're trying to explore. You
What you're
know,
trying for, yeah. With the questions you want to ask.
and so that story you brought up about your colleagues at 30 something, you go, yeah, but what's this about? I mean, what I do need to know is what is it about, and in terms of the characters I'm really following, what do they need,
Yeah.
and have those two things playing in one another, and then having arrived at those two things, is the story necessary? Do I actually feel it's necessary? There's too much art in the world. There's like a
Yeah.
lot of bad art, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of very talented people who are not given the opportunities to make great art, right?
Yeah.
So you have to ask yourself: is this particular story? I mean, and it's a being an artist is an act of selfishness in one regard. Like the first person you're trying to please is yourself. What am I interested in? What do I care about? What do I feel is necessary? And if it feels necessary to you, maybe that's enough. But I also do think about like how necessary is this to the world, this story, you
Yeah.
know, like because it's a paradox. On the one hand, like we have to convince ourselves the audience doesn't matter, right? Like you don't want to pander to them.
Right.
You
You
don't
can't
try
write
to
for the audience. Exactly.
no one knows how the world will think about what you're trying to communicate. And you're putting yourself in a position of, I have something to communicate to you. And it's a one-way street. You're not necessarily communicating back to me. So there's that, which is, you're in yourself looking outwards and trying to blind yourself to like, what are all the things that critics might say or how this might be received? I need to focus on this. But you are engaging in a process where in success, your hope is to actually reach people.
Yeah.
Not to make a film that only you watch. You want a lot of people to watch it, or if not a lot of people, at least some people. You
Yeah.
want to communicate. So I do think there's a stage at which you think, well, who am I trying to communicate to?
Yeah.
And what do I want them to experience and feel, or be confused about and explore, and is that a valuable thing?